Hello and welcome to this Astranti video. Now this is a highlights video. So this is something a bit different from what we normally do, but I don't know if you're about to sit your ACCA Strategic Business Leader exam. If you are, you may be getting a little bit nervous. You may be thinking, I don't know how best to spend my time before the exam. Well, luckily for you, you're in exactly the right place. This video is perfect for you because you're going to gain a really strong understanding of the pre-scene. Now, I mentioned it's a highlights video, and that's because it's going to be showing you the highlights from 3 videos. Well, in fact, it's actually from a series of 5 videos that we here at Astranti have prepared for you on this forthcoming pre-scene. Now, the videos themselves, as I've mentioned, are a series of 5. The first 3 are a line-by-line analysis of the pre-scene, drawing out all the most important bits of information and explaining any areas that you may be a little bit uncertain by. So, let's take a first look at the highlight from the pre-scene analysis. We have to get cracking because we've got a lot of information to get through in this video. And we're starting off with heritage charities income. So we're not focusing on HP specifically at this point. We're going to be talking about them, but that isn't the main focus. We're looking at heritage charities in ACCA as a whole. And the first element of income is donations. So I'm sure we've all been approached on the street by someone with a bucket asking to throw money in, or you've had a phone call, or you've seen adverts off the TV. I even get texts from charities, but also you can get them via email, through post. There's a number of ways that charities approach donors for donations. So basically a one-off payment, or perhaps a payment every month, or maybe if you're an organization, you might give corporate sponsorship. Now for heritage charities, they also give visitors to the site. So in video 1, we talked about the fact you don't just get members going to these sites, you also get kind of these one-off visitors, and there'll be places where they can donate. There might be a roof appeal is something we often see in UK churches where they need to replace the roof, so they ask you to put a donation in a bucket. But also we can see here that charities advertise, so they take out adverts on TV or via social media. And also then most charities, and you can see, or here I said most charities here, because again we're not focusing on HP, so most charities in ACCA have websites, so donors can go onto them and donate if they'd like. And obviously charities keep all the details of people that have donated before, and then they can really target their marketing campaigns and kind of go for people that have shown kind of sympathy for that charity's cause. Now you can see the red note I put at the top here is this is a major source of income for charities, and we'll look at how much of an income that forms for HP in video 3. But one thing that should be aware is really that donations are highly unpredictable, aren't they? You're relying on people to kind of be in a position where they can make a donation and also be affected by the charity's cause. Now, obviously, if there are economic downturns, people have less disposable income, and most likely, people are going to choose to cut back on their charitable donations. Now, in the same way, if we're talking about corporate sponsorships, they're going to be subject to business performance cycles. So if that company is performing badly, then of course, they're likely to withdraw their funding. And so one of the things to note here is that ACCA, as we will see a little bit later on, or we might have actually covered in video 1 very quickly, is in a recession. So it's more than likely that its citizens are feeling the pinch and perhaps are withdrawing their donations or reducing or going to be reducing their donations to HP. And so it's really important that charities develop long-term donor engagement strategies. They look to diversify their income streams, and also they maintain reserves so that they can buffer any kind of times of financial uncertainty. So we're thinking back to the ACCA SBL syllabus, we're thinking about financial sustainability and risk management. Okay, the next source of income for heritage charities in ACCA is membership, and you can see here the membership can be offered on an annual basis or a one-off life membership basis. So you take it out for your whole life. Now, that's quite unusual because I think it's more than likely that we see kind of annual memberships or monthly memberships in the UK. But anyway, the difference obviously between membership and donations is that membership programs mean that charities have a kind of reliable, recurring income that makes them a really key financial tool. So obviously members are going to be paying this annual or kind of lifetime fee in return for benefits like the free entry, exclusive events, or newsletters. Now we think back to the UK again. We've talked about the National Trust a lot in video 1. They offer a tiered membership model, so there's varying levels of benefits, and of course what they're trying to do is encourage higher value contributions, and also these schemes really help to build kind of loyal supporter bases and enhance community engagement. So obviously these are really vital for charities. So if they want to maximize revenues, charities have to actively promote memberships using targeted marketing, loyalty incentives, as well as digital engagement in order to maintain renewals. Okay, the next income is admission fees. So these are non-members who turn up to visit the sites. So obviously this is going to be another major revenue stream, but obviously visitor numbers are going to be quite variable. Could be any number of causes, time of the year, so seasonality, economic factors. Again, people might not be spending on days out if they're in a recession. And some heritage sites really struggle with over-reliance on ticket revenue, and of course that leads to problems when there are downturns. So again, we're coming back to the idea about we've really got to kind of find a mix for our incomes if we want to be financially sustainable. Now, in terms of admission fees, then charities could implement tiered pricing models. They could offer off-peak visits, as family packages, all those kind of things. We've also all seen these earphones that people wear to have guided tours. Again, these are all ways to make admissions more attractive, or perhaps to charge extra on top of these admission fees. Now, another kind of term that's become quite popular in the UK over the last 18 months, probably popular is the wrong word actually, but it's a word that's been used, a term that's been used a lot, is dynamic pricing. And this is when companies charge more during peak periods and offer discounts at quieter times. It kind of made the headlines in the UK over the band's Oasis reunion when the ticket sellers were charging far more than the tickets were actually worth because they were so heavily inundated with inquiries. So obviously dynamic pricing would be a way to charge more during these really peak periods, but also offer discounts on quieter times to try and help kind of regulate visitor flow and obviously maximize earnings for these charities. Okay, and then we can move down. Now I scroll down to try and get a bit more on screen. Hopefully you saw the notes I've been putting up there. And we can come down to our last part of income, which is commercial activities. Okay, so obviously commercial income comes from a number of sources. So we talked about cafes and restaurants in video 1. They can vary in size, offering snacks or drinks, but can go right through to offering full meals. And even in some cases, charities can open their sites for corporate events or weddings. So for example, if you've got a stately home, you might want to, the charities might want to rent out the garden so people can use it for marquees and have weddings in the grounds and all those kind of stuff. Now, obviously, for those of us that have been to these kind of places, especially if we have children, we'll note that most sites, not just in their data, but also in the UK, have shops selling guidebooks or other items connected to the site. You know, books on the period of the house and all those kind of things. And then larger shops have the toys that we all know about. And some of these items could be branded with the charity's logo. And also some charities have shops which aren't on the sites but are in shopping areas, and they offer the same items which are sold at charity sites. Now, I was in a town recently in the Cotswolds, and I think it's a bit of a reach to call it a charity, but Highgrove Estate, which is Prince Charles's estate, I think, or King Charles, King Charles's estate, I don't want to get my head cut off, had a site in the town, the local town. Now, obviously, that was a way for them to make money from the name. That's going to be reinvested back into the estate. So, very similar thing. Now, what I've put as notes here in red is just kind of an awareness that we don't want to end up ruining the stately home, what we're trying to preserve, in the name of commercialization. So we don't want our stately home to end up looking like the Las Vegas Strip, for example, with neon lights and signs. It's really important that we balance the commercialization that makes our charity sustainable with heritage preservation. We don't want to damage our reputation. We don't want to alienate supporters. We don't want to ruin our charity's mission, because, of course, if we damage our reputation, all those kind of things, we're not going to get so many donations. People aren't going to renew their membership. So it's really important that we are careful with what we choose to do. Okay, let's move down now to look at the expenditure for the charity sector as a whole. Okay, so what we're looking at here are the expenditures. So obviously, we're looking at the demands that are going to be made on charities in terms of operating these sites and obviously maintaining these historical sites. And obviously, it's really important that these costs we're going to be looking at are managed effectively in order for charities to be financially sustainable and to kind of preserve their mission. So obviously, what we're going to be doing here is looking at kind of the three key spending areas. Now, the first of those are the site operating costs. There we go, to get the marker. So obviously these are the day-to-day expenses. These include the labour costs, but are going to include other things apart from salaries and wages, things like the utilities and insurance and the security and visitor management. So most of these costs are going to be fixed. So obviously these are going to have to be covered even if visitor numbers are down, even if donation numbers are down. And so in the real world, we move away from a DCA for a while. I told you I keep pronouncing it a different way every time. Then charities implement strategies like seasonal hiring, so they're not hiring so many people in the kind of low season, energy efficiency initiatives, and outsourcing of their kind of non-core functions. Now, a lot of charities rely heavily on volunteers, and obviously that does mitigate staffing costs. And we know that's something that HP does. 20,000 volunteers, only 4,000 members of paid staff themselves. So there we go. That is site operating costs. Now we can move on to the maintenance and conservation costs. Now, obviously, this is the very crux of what HP want to do, isn't it? They want to maintain the sites that they are in charge of, that they own, and they want to conserve them. Now, obviously, that's going to take maintenance because we know that HP deals in properties that are over 300 years old, so they're not likely to be in the best possible condition. Now, the maintenance schedules for these charities, at the end of the day, so not just focusing on HP, take place regularly throughout the year. They can be undertaken by the charity's employees, or perhaps they bring in outside contractors. And obviously, if you've got these kind of one-off major conservation projects, obviously that is going to require specialist skills, so you're going to bring those in. And obviously, they're not probably going to be cheap also. Now, one thing also that they're obviously going to be aware of. There's going to be things like heritage protection laws. So in the UK, for example, we have listings of buildings, our historical buildings. So the higher the list, in fact, it's the lower the listing. I think it's grade 1 is the most severe restrictions. You really need government approval before you can make changes. Everything has to be given the okay, so these historical buildings aren't changed too much. Now, again, we're not sure if that's applicable in ACCA, but it's something to bear in mind. Now, the final paragraph deals with the historical objects that kind of are within the properties, because also it's not just the sites themselves, the actual properties themselves, but also the things in those sites. They require complex treatment, and these seem like they have to be carried out by specialists. So this obviously is going to be a significant cost for HP. Okay, and then we move down to our admin costs. So these are fundraising, marketing, administrating membership, and this also includes the salary cost of the charity's executive management and other head office admin staff. And obviously, one of the things that kind of charities get accused of and kind of beaten over the head with, if the kind of executive management are paid too much money, because there's kind of this perception that charity staff should be doing it for the love of whatever charity they're doing it for, rather than as a profession. So if they're seen to be paid too much, then obviously this can have reputational damage for the charity itself. And of course, that's a significant risk for charities, because obviously then people may just stop supporting the cause. So obviously this isn't directly related to preservation, but it is really important for kind of sustaining visitor numbers and donor engagement, because this is all about having a really well-rounded marketing strategy and advertising, and obviously that can improve the footfall and membership, etc. So a number of costs to bear in mind for the administration cost there. So there we go, that's the expenditure section. We've been looking at the site operating costs, conservation costs, the admin expenses, and hopefully what we kind of draw on the conclusion from is that sustainable cost management is essential if heritage charities are to remain viable. So there we go. That was the pre-scene analysis. 3 videos really getting to the detail of the pre-scene. But there's 2 more videos in this series, and the first of those is the strategic analysis video. Now, one of the key elements of this ACCA SBL exam is that you are able to use key models, key theories, key tools when analysing your company. Now, that can be a really hard thing to do when you've just learned about the company, when you've just found out who they are. So here at Astranti, we've done the hard work for you, and that's what you're going to find in this clip from our strategic analysis video. So what we're going to do now is have a look at HP's mission. So firstly, we're thinking about the purpose of HP, or really the mission of HP. So we're thinking, who does the organisation exist for, and what does it want to achieve long term? Now, we know there was lots of mentions of that in the pre-scene, wasn't it? Basically, HP's mission is to permanently protect and preserve sites that have been entrusted to it, and promote interest and access to them within ACCA. Make sure there's accessibility for all. So some key aspects of this mission are, we've got heritage protection, making sure that the sites are safeguarded and maintained. We've got public engagement, making sure we try and inspire and engage as many people as possible in history and education. And obviously there's accessibility as well. Something we looked at in the pre-scene. We're saying, okay, is it just physical accessibility, financial accessibility, all different kinds of accessibility, making sure that it's open to as many visitors and members as possible. Okay, that's the purpose/mission. Now let's take a look at the strategy. So how is the organisation competing, for example, is a question we may ask. Well, HP's strategy is based on a balance really between financial stability and its charitable objectives. So obviously its core mission is to protect buildings, it's heritage conservation, but obviously it's got to operate in a way that requires generating income through membership, through commercial activities and donations. So it needs to preserve, and it's got to use the money it makes through kind of a diverse income stream to help preserve that. So areas of strategic focus for HP are going to be conservation and preservation, making sure that's that kind of long-term survival. Obviously, revenue generation is going to be really key. We've talked about diversifying income already. We looked about that a lot in the pre-scene. Obviously, it's already doing that, although membership is like the mainstay of its income. Visitor engagement is another really important strategy for it. Obviously, they want engagement, education, all that kind of stuff. And obviously, in terms of long term, it's not just about kind of looking after the sites. There's the idea of sustainability and climate resilience, kind of preparing it or the sites and the objects for what the world might be like in a few years' time. Okay, so that's strategy. Now we bring up values. What does HP stand for? Well, we know from the pre-scene, actually, there was quite a lot on its values. We had historical truth, making sure, for example, that the sites are kind of a fair representation of history. Accessibility, we've already talked about. Enjoyment and engagement, we've already talked about. Transparency and accountability. So these are linked to things such as maintaining ethical governance and reporting, which we're gonna come on to. Inclusivity and diversity, making sure there's broad engagement and representation, again, linking back to making sure that everyone kind of feels engaged with these sites. And of course, that environmental responsibility too, which we kind of touched on, but also worth bearing in mind that we don't want to be, and I mean we as in HP, don't want to be making the situation worse. So our operations need to be sustainable too. So there was a lot on values in the pre-scene. In fact, there's a lot more than I normally see in the ACCA materials on all these kind of things about the mission and the values. And then finally, we've got the policies. So this is how people have to act to get this mission, this purpose, this strategy, and these values. And we saw there was a lot of info on policies too. We saw a code of conduct. We saw there's a really kind of clear set out governance structure. We know there's health and safety policies in place. That was definitely mentioned. We have a sustainability policy, obviously, to make sure that we've got these conservation efforts in hand. There's going to be procurement and supplier management, because obviously we know we worked with suppliers for our commercial activities, but also kind of contractors in terms of maintaining the buildings and doing this kind of skilled conservation work. And there's obviously digital and cybersecurity policies as well, because we know that we abided by the data policies that exist in these, the kind of the GDPR equivalent. So there we go. Much more than I would normally have at this stage of the strategic analysis video. It seemed really clear to me. There seemed like there was quite a lot of emphasis placed on this, and I'm presuming really that's because it's a charity. So we're not so focused on profit maximization. We've really got to bear in mind our kind of other duty. This is a kind of a really key point of this pre-scene, I feel. Okay, so that's our mission statement. Now we can move on to the balanced scorecard. Okay, with the balanced scorecard, let's start with the financial perspective. So obviously this is focusing on financial sustainability. That's a kind of a buzzword, not a buzzword, that's the wrong thing to say, but that's a term we heard repeatedly in the pre-scene. So obviously let's look at financial sustainability and performance. So obviously we want to be looking at kind of indicators here that ensure HP generates sufficient income to support its mission, its conservation efforts. So on screen, I put revenue, growth year on year, operating surplus as a percentage of income, and cost to income ratio. And some of the key considerations I've used for this is the income stability firstly, and that HP relies on membership fees, donations and commercial activities. So obviously it needs steady revenue growth in order to sustain its operations and maintain conservation efforts. Cost management was another consideration of this. So site maintenance and conservation costs are rising. So obviously there needs to be careful financial control in order to be able to continue in our work. Revenue diversification is another key area. So any over-reliance on any single income stream is a risk, maybe like we're seeing with membership at the moment. So obviously if we're going to increase revenue from retail, catering and events, it means that we've got a more stable future. And obviously financial resilience is another key consideration in this area, because we know we've got economic downturn in ACCA with the recession. Fluctuating visitor numbers may kind of come from that, and obviously that could impact our income. So obviously we want to be monitoring the operating surplus and cost income ratio to help assess financial health and adaptability. If you pardon me for getting that word wrong. Right, learning perspective. So looking at how we develop our capabilities, our knowledge and innovation in order to sustain our mission. So I've got the number of volunteer training hours, the employee satisfaction and retention rates, and investment in technology and sustainability projects. So really, obviously, I've highlighted volunteers, the first one, and that's because HP is really dependent on its volunteers. So it's really important that we train them to obviously mean that make them more skilled and to give a better service to our members and our visitors, but also to retain them in order for the kind of effective site operation. Staff development is also a key one. Obviously, we need employees that have expertise in conservation, heritage management and business operations to make sure that HP runs effectively. And I've also got technology adoption. So we're thinking about digital tools. And this is an idea, maybe bringing in digital tours or other ways to digitally engage with our members and our guests. And also things like automated booking systems just make things run more smoothly, improve efficiency, and might make us less reliant on volunteers. So that's definitely somewhere we could grow. Okay, then we move on to our internal process perspective, where we are focusing on operational efficiency and effectiveness. So here we've got a number of conservation projects completed annually, the number of health and safety incident rates, and the supplier and contractor performance ratings. So obviously the number one on there is really just a way to kind of keep track of our primary mission, which is to protect historic sites. And so obviously the number of conservation projects we complete is a real key measure of success. Then we've got health and safety compliance, because we know from the pre-scene that lots of our sites have physical risks, maybe steep steps, uneven terrain. So we want to keep incident rates low, in order to protect our guests and our volunteers and our staff. And I've also got our kind of procurement and contractor management kind of rating, so we can work out how our suppliers are doing, whether we're being cost efficient. And that's really important because we outsource quite a lot of our work. And then finally, we've got the customer perspective. So here we're obviously going to be looking at how well that we meet the needs of our key stakeholders that include visitors, members and donors. So I've got a membership renewal rate. Well, that's obviously a key metric to track, because obviously we want to make sure that's not plummeting, because that shows that we're not engaging with our members well, but also sort of a little warning light that we're not going to have so much funding next year. Visitor satisfaction scores obviously shows how well the guests think that we're doing, how engaged they are. And I've also got public engagement metrics, so the number of people that are turning up to events, the number of comments and likes on social media, for example. That's just showing how well our message is getting across, and really maybe showing how well our brand is doing in ACCA. Okay, so there we go. I think that all makes sense. Hopefully we've got quite a holistic view of HP's performance there, which is the kind of the the thought behind the balanced scorecard. We've linked financial sustainability, with operational effectiveness and stakeholder engagement. So let's zoom out now. And we can come to a screen, a term we've already used a few times before in this video, and that is governance. Okay, so to do this section, my brain was shut down then. I'm going to put on screen some really good attributes, or some attributes of good governance. Now, again, when I've done this before, it's not necessarily been that much information about governance. When I put up the list, we probably only get about 30% that we can actually cover. We had to infer some things. But actually, I feel like there's quite a lot of information about governance in this video about HP, or in the pre-scene about HP. Now, it's not I'm not in this video not kind of highlighting what issues I think might come up in the pre-scene or in your exam, But there does seem to be a different emphasis in this pre-scene towards talking about mission and governance and these kind of things. But anyway, let's get going. So, first element of good governance is a separate CEO and chair, and that ensures obviously balanced leadership and it avoids excessive executive control. And obviously for HP, it does have a separate chair and CEO, as the chair leads the board of trustees and the CEO heads the executive team. Then we come down to the independent NEDs. Now obviously corporate boards normally have a majority of independent NEDs to try and provide unbiased oversight. Now, HP's board of trustees does include both nominated and member-elected trustees. Some may be independent, but there isn't any explicit mention of governance requirements for independent. So I've kind of put a question mark here. Not sure we can fully answer that. But I mean, from what we're inferring, there doesn't seem to be a lot wrong with the governance structure. In turn, the next element of good governance is having audit, nomination and remuneration committees to help with accountability and decision making. And yes, we do know that HP does have nomination, audit and remuneration committees. They're going to be mirroring corporate best practices. The next element of good governance I'm putting on screen is risk management. So obviously this ensures resilience against funding uncertainties, operational challenges and external threats like economic downturns or climate risks. And we do know, don't we, another tick, that HP maintains a risk register that covers the key financial, reputational and operational risks. The next element I've got is direct disclosure, of directors' pay. Now we don't know whether executive pay is publicly disclosed. Now, as a charity, I've kind of got a question mark here, HP is likely subject to disclosure requirements, but transparency on pay structures is essential for public trust. So the stakeholders, the donors, the members are going to be expecting clear disclosures of executive pay, especially in this charity sector where we spoke about in the pre-scene that any kind of allegations of high salaries can really impact negatively on the organisation. So it doesn't explicitly mention it, but we can infer they probably do. Okay, then we've got financial reporting and control. So obviously strong financial controls ensures proper use of funds, and obviously in our case an alignment with HP's mission. And actually we do know that HP publishes annual financial statements, so we've got transparency in income, expenditure and financial performance. The next element is information for directors to facilitate good decision making. And so this is all about the fact that effective governance really relies on accurate, timely and relevant information for decision making. Now, the pre-scene doesn't specifically specify what information is provided to directors, but we can see HP's structured governance, and so it is likely, or it's reasonable for us to infer that financial reports, risk assessments and strategic updates are shared. Now, without clarity on whether trustees and executives receive regular structured reporting, there could be a risk of decisions being made without full transparency. We just don't know quite enough about it. Okay, the next element or characteristic of good governance is that the board involvement in decision making, or all directors are involved in decision making. Now, we know from the pre-scene that the board of trustees is actively involved in strategy and oversight, and that ensures that key decisions align with HP's missions. And really, this element of good governance ensures the trustees are engaged and actively shape HP's strategic direction. Okay, the next element is regular meetings with institutional shareholders. Well, obviously, we don't have any institutional shareholders, but we do know that members vote on key issues at the AGM. So I've gone on to the next characteristic of good governance. And whilst HP doesn't need to engage institutional investors, the AGM is still a key forum for transparency and accountability for the members and the roles that they play. So we've seen quite a lot on good governance here, and it seems that HP is operating under good governance. Should stress that obviously we are dealing with a charity in this pre-scene, and there are differences versus corporate in terms of governance. We've just covered one. There's no shareholders. So obviously HP isn't accountable to investors. It's accountable instead to its members and donors. And so that's why we said it's still making good use of its AGM. It's got mission-driven decisions. So the decisions aren't based on profit, but instead on heritage conservation and public benefit. We know there's going to be public and donor scrutiny. So there's going to be a greater focus on ethical leadership and spending transparency. And we know there's also board structure differences. So we know HP is a trustee-based model, and that's different from a normal traditional corporate governance. But we still can see that there are insights. So there we go. That was our strategic analysis video, but we have one more. And this is one of our most popular videos. This is our top 10 video issues. So in this top 10 video, we identify what we think, using our expertise and our experience, what we think are the most likely issues to appear in the exam based on our analysis of the case study. And then what we do in this video is we highlight to you the issue's relevance. Then we kind of come up with some ideas of how the examiners may test that information, what forms the questions may take. And then we show you which bits of the case study we would look to answer those questions most effectively. Take a look. Okay, let's get going with number one. And I don't think number one is going to be much of a surprise for you at all. So number one is financial sustainability. Now, the reason why I say I don't think you'll find it a surprise is because we use the term financial sustainability a lot through those videos. And we know how important it is for HP to be financially sustainable if they want to achieve their mission. Now, we know they're very reliant on memberships especially, but they do have this kind of diverse revenue stream as well. Now, another reason we've chosen it is that financial management is obviously a key ACCA SBL topic. Okay, so when we're talking about financial sustainability, what are the likely issues that you may be facing under this topic? Well, the first one that we've highlighted is the fact that we've seen the growth has started to slow down at HP, but against that, costs have continued to rise. Now, another element that's a bit of worry for the financial sustainability is that they're really heavily dependent on membership fees. So we know there's a bit of a recession happening. We know there's other charities. We know there's competition. So if those membership fees suddenly dropped, then they would be in a whole lot of trouble. They wouldn't be financially sustainable anymore. Now, they're also reliant on donations, but not to such an extent. Now, one other thing is something I also continue to mention, and that is kind of this over-commercialization. The charity's going to have to be, you're going to have to be really aware that you're dealing with a charity and you can't be over-commercializing your sites. You can't put neon signs around stately homes. You can't have cinemas and bowling alleys. You've got to be really bearing in mind about this historical truth of the sites. So anything we do to kind of help improve our revenue streams has to bear the mission-driven activities in mind and what the charity actually stands for. So there's some of the likely issues. Then some key points to raise. I've already mentioned one of them, all about that diversification of income sources, so they're not so heavily reliant on memberships and donations. Are there any other ways we can bring in revenue into the charity? Also, we've got to think about how we can manage costs. Also, one of the key things here is that if we say, okay, we're going to stop our kind of program of maintenance and conservation, well, obviously you can't do that. It's a charity. One of the KPIs we talked about was actually measuring how many conservation efforts we do complete. It's a really vital thing. So how are we going to manage these costs without compromising our mission? And obviously long-term financial planning is another key area, because we know that part of the mission at HP is to make sure these sites are protected for the long term. They don't just have to protect it for a couple of months. So really thinking how we're going to protect the charity in order to be able to do that. Okay, and then some relevant theory that maybe you want to brush up on if you can't remember that you'd be using for financial sustainability would be budgeting techniques, revenue diversification strategies, so talking about maybe grants, which there really wasn't a lot of mention of in the pre-scene, which is a bit of a surprise. Partnerships is something we brought out in the strategic analysis video, talking about maybe partnering with educational institutes or tourism bodies. And then also financial risk management, so scenario playing and contingency reserves. Okay, so there we go. That's number one. That's kind of how this video works. We'll be going through it, kind of bringing our ideas together. So we can move on now to number two. Now we can see this kind of is linked on from our financial sustainability video, because we're talking here about membership retention. So stemming from the fact really that membership is the key income, but against that we know that membership rates are slowing. So we've also got to think about how we can engage our members so we can retain them. And retention strategies are also a pretty common ACCA topic area. Okay, number two, or the likely issues I should say that you'll like to pick up on, is the difficulty in actually attracting any new members and also retaining the ones we've got. We talked about how important it was there's no reputational images or problems, because we can't do anything that might jeopardize our ability to attract and retain members. We've already mentioned very briefly competitions from other attractions, possibly digital experiences. Is the kind of demographic changing in it? They see it so that membership's becoming more tricky, or is membership slowing because of the recession, or are there just too many other choices so people are choosing other ways to entertain themselves on weekends and holidays? And another issue is that actually the benefits we offer simply aren't good enough. Did notice when we went through the pre-scene that there was a lot of focus on voting rights and being involved in kind of the AGM, that kind of stuff, the very technical side of it, but there wasn't really a lot of mention of kind of fun, engaging things like priorities to events or members only kind of event days, all those kind of things. So that's definitely somewhere where they could improve. And the key points to raise are loyalty programs is always a popular one. Tiered memberships to attract different budgets, maybe especially good in times of recession to try and lower it as much as possible. Maybe you could have memberships that only included some sites, maybe your local area, something like that. Enhancing visitor experience to improve engagement, obviously, make it more interactive, more storytelling would be a really interesting way to go. And also, something we mentioned quite a lot on the strategic analysis was kind of leveraging digital tools for communication. And some relevant theory here is CRM systems for membership retention, looking at pricing elasticity and demand-based pricing, something we mentioned in one of the pre-scenes, and obviously looking at engagement models, maybe applying tools to look at customer loyalty. So there we go. That is number 2. We can move on now to number 3 with our volunteer dependence. Now, this is something that we mentioned time and time again. So again, probably no surprise in our choice. There was a couple of mentions that sites couldn't necessarily open when they were supposed to because of volunteer fluctuations. We know we got 20,000 volunteers, so that's kind of a difficult thing to manage. Now, because the reliance on volunteers isn't just a risk, it's also an opportunity, because it means we're not paying these 20,000 members of staff. Makes it a really strong area for testing, because you've got risk and you've got opportunity. Okay, let's have a look at some likely issues. So obviously, volunteer recruitment and retention challenges. The risk of rising costs if actually we don't get any volunteers anymore and we have to start replacing them with paid members of staff. And what would happen to our visitor engagement if the visitor numbers suddenly dropped off? Is that then in turn going to ruin the experience, which in turn is going to ruin our membership numbers? So some key points to think about here is, how are we going to incentivize the volunteers? Bring in some training and support structures so it feels like there's a community, so the volunteers feel like they're wanted and they are improving their skill sets. And obviously this also has a knock-on effect also for improving the day-to-day enjoyment for our members and our visitors, and also some strategic workforce planning. And some likely or relevant theory to bring up is Herzberg's 2-factor theory. We're looking at volunteer motivation, some strategic workforce planning, as already mentioned, and some non-financial reward systems like recognition and, as we've already mentioned, training. So there we go. That is number 3, our volunteer dependence. So there we go, there's our top 10 issues, and there's our video focus on the ACCA SBL. Really analysing the pre-scene and then applying all the key models, the key theories, and then demonstrating to you what we think is most likely to come up in your exam. Now, to accompany these 3 videos, we also produce an industry analysis. Now, this is a large document that's going to explain to you everything you need to know about the industry. And alongside that, we've also prepared 2 mock exams to make sure that you can practice using your newfound knowledge before you come to the exam.